A baggage boy like you wouldn't know what a rich man's wallet looks like. The thick leather wallet hit the marble floor, bouncing off Derek's worn steel-toe boot. He bent to pick it up, grease-stained gloves trembling slightly. Before he could even lift his head, "Don't act noble. I know you're kind, just waiting for a chance to steal." Passengers at the baggage claim turned to look. A few smirked. Several raised their phones to film. Derek froze. He held out the wallet with both hands, head lowered. The silver-haired man in a black tailored suit flanked by two bodyguards snatched the wallet, flipped it open, peeled off a thick stack of bills. He tore half off and let it fall. "Here, payment for your performance in poverty." Money fluttered to the ground. One bill landed against Derek's cheek. He didn't speak. He just knelt and gathered the scattered cash, silently. Behind him, a burst of soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Ahead, the billionaire turned and walked away, leaving behind a packed terminal and a baggage handler publicly humiliated. Derek crouched to pick up the final bill beneath a luggage cart. As he stood, a woman in a red dress passed by, sneering. "Nice act. Do poor people rehearse sob stories now?" A man dragging a Louis Vuitton suitcase scoffed. That tip wouldn't buy him a shoelace from that guy's shoes. Derek stood still, the sting of eyes all over him. His grip tightened. A boy, maybe 8, tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mom, did that man steal a wallet?" She hushed him quickly. "No, don't look. People like that help them, and you'll lose everything." Derek swallowed hard, lips pressed tight. He turned away, heading toward the staff hallway where there were no phones, no whispers, just the clang of carts and the smell of sweat. Before disappearing, he looked back once. The billionaire stood in the distance, now signing papers with airport security. He didn't look at Derek, just took out a silk handkerchief and wiped the wallet as if it had been dirtied. "Watch it, luggage boy. That's a designer suitcase, not a garbage bin." The voice cracked through the terminal like a slap. Derek barely had time to react before the sleek white suitcase was yanked from his hands by a woman in heels that clicked like gunfire. Her coat was spotless. Her disgust was louder than her words. Passengers turned to look not at her, but at him. He straightened up. "Sorry, Mark. Admit them." She didn't even look back. Behind the polished floor of Terminal D was another world, one of oil stains, metal clangs, and sweat. In the grim staff room, Derek sat at a corner table. His lunch tray was untouched, a bruised apple rolling toward the edge. In his hands, a pocket-sized language book, basic French for aviation staff. "Bonjour. Je suis là pour vous aider." His lips moved silently. Again, a veteran loader passed by, reeking of sarcasm. "Studying again. What are you going to be the next flight captain?" Laughter. "He de wafe de Merouan." Derek kept reading. Two younger guys from the new crew slumped into chairs across the room, watching him. "Betty thinks he's getting out of here with that little book. Nah, he's learning how to say, 'Please tip me,' in French." Derek looked up, not to argue, just to observe. Same faces, same jokes, same ceiling tiles leaking water above them every winter. He turned the page. "Puis-je porter vos bagages? Can I carry your bags?" He already did that. Every day, for strangers who didn't even see his face. But someday, he'd say it in uniform. Not as a handler, as a host. His fingers tightened around the book. Not because he was ashamed, but because he knew change doesn't come with applause. It begins in silence with a choice no one claps for. Security checked that guy's pocket. Derek turned, confused, as two airport officers approached. A woman in a business suit stood behind them, pointing. He brushed against me near the baggage belt. "My wallet's gone." The officers looked at Derek. One gestured. "Sir, step aside." Passengers slowed down. Eyes watched. Phones tilted. Derek raised his hands calmly. "I didn't take anything. I didn't even touch her." The search was fast, rough, and humiliating. Gloves patted his uniform. His pockets were pulled out. Nothing. "Clear," the officer muttered. They turned to the woman. She frowned, then tapped her purse. "Ah, found it. Sorry. My mistake." No apology to Derek. No glance his way. She walked off as if nothing had happened. The crowd, they didn't clap. They just walked away. Back in the break room, a junior loader leaned over. Heard you got frisked. Damn. You sure you didn't pocket it? Derek didn't reply. Another added, grinning. Maybe French class teaches pickpocketing now. Huh. He stood up. Calm, quiet. He walked out of the room, past laughter that clung to his jacket like smoke. That night, he skipped dinner. Instead, he sat under a stairwell near gate 27 with a flashlight, tracing vocabulary words across pages stained by handling gloves. The terminal lights hummed overhead. His world stayed silent, but his determination louder than ever. How hard is it to follow basic loading protocol? Derek. The supervisor's voice echoed in the cargo bay, a concrete tomb echoing every word. Pallets of oversized luggage were stacked high. The air stank of rubber and jet fuel. Derek stood frozen beside a collapsed crate. The straps had slipped. 2 pieces of cargo had shifted. No damage, no injury. But the moment was all his boss needed. Maybe if you spent less time pretending to be a damn tour guide and more time learning your job, this wouldn't happen. The whole crew stood silent. No one moved. No one spoke. A younger loader muttered, "Loud enough. French class didn't teach you how to tie knots." Huh. Laughter. Ninnerman, CERN. Cruel, cornered laughter. Derek swallowed. The straps were frayed. I reported them last week. Don't talk back, the supervisor barked. You're not here to think. You're here to lift. Don't start acting above your pay grade. The clipboard in the man's hand slapped against Derek's chest. Sign this incident report. Derek looked down at the paper. False accusations. Fabricated negligence. He didn't sign. He didn't walk away either. He just stood there, silent, staring at the form. Later that night, while others smoked behind the terminal fence, Derek sat in a dark corner of the canteen. He wasn't studying. Not that night. He stared at the report form in his hand. Wrinkled. Unjust. Real. Then, slowly, he pulled out a highlighter. Not to mark his mistake, but to underline every lie so he'd remember what to rise above. The next morning, Terminal D was buried in sleet and gray. Derek arrived earlier than anyone. No uniform yet. No checklist in hand. Just a roll of duct tape and a toolkit. He knelt beside the same faulty cargo straps that had nearly cost him his job. One by one, he replaced them, tested the tension, refastened each crate with the precision of a surgeon. By the time the first shift arrived, the bay was orderly. Safer, he to the souvenir noir. Better, 1 year. But no one noticed, except the new intern, a nervous, skinny kid in oversized boots. Did you fix all this yourself? Derek didn't stop working, just gave a small nod. The kid hesitated, then asked, how'd you learn to do it right? Derek looked at him, eyes steady. Because I was taught wrong. And I paid attention. He handed the kid a pair of gloves. You want to learn? That day, between hauling freight and dodging insults, Derek trained the intern on safe loading protocol. No audience? Yekirmasen. No praise. Just 2 men, one trying, the other refusing to quit. That night, back at home, Derek opened his laptop. Cracks lined the screen like veins. He typed into the search bar night school, airport logistics certification, then fluent French audio drills. He clicked both. His fingers hovered over the mouse for a second. Then he pressed enroll. No applause, no fanfare. But in that quiet apartment above a bodega, lit by a single desk lamp and hope, a baggage boy just changed his trajectory. The screen flickered as Derek hit enroll. A loading bar spun. Confirmation email sent. He leaned back, closed his eyes, then a chime. New message. Demershus may sure you. From private, no reply. Subject, we've been watching. He frowned. Clicked. Inside one line. Return to gate D12. Tuesday, alone. No signature, no explanation. Just coordinates, and a quiet promise that something was about to change. Tuesday, 1:57 p.m., gate D12. The corridor was dim, echoing with the low hum of airport systems most passengers never noticed. Derek stood alone, no suitcase, no cart, just a sealed envelope in his jacket and a tension that gripped tighter than his steel-toe boots. The gate remained locked. The screens above it, blank. Un tornillo de 30 p.m. A mechanical click cut through the air like a breath held too long. A door to the restricted corridor swung open. A tall man stepped out, civilian clothes, clean-shaven, no ID badge, no smile. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at Derek as if measuring something invisible. "Then you're early." Derek nodded. "I follow instructions." The man handed him a plain manila envelope. "Don't ask questions. Don't talk. Return same place, same time next week." He walked away before Derek could respond. In the silence that followed, Derek's heart raced, not from fear, but recognition. Back in his apartment, the envelope lay unopened for hours. It sat on the table while the radiator hissed in the background and distant sirens faded into the night. Finally, he opened it. Photos for Rana Tunatunam, Okinenamdi. Crisp. Black and white. Him hunched over faulty straps, retying pallets alone in the cold. Guiding the intern through procedures. Sitting at gate 27 with a flashlight and his French manual. Even one from behind, showing him cleaning a soda spill without being asked. Someone had been watching. But not just observing, studying. On the back of one photo, a watermark faint but deliberate. A falcon, wings outstretched. In mid-flight, not a brand, not a logo, a symbol. He held it up to the light. Why a falcon? And why him? The next morning, he returned to work. On the surface, nothing changed. He was still handed heavy luggage, still mocked in the break room. When the same loader sneered, still chasing that flight crew dream, Derek simply nodded once. Because now he wasn't chasing. He was being tested. By Sunday, the intern, quiet, nervous, caught him near the loading dock. "Hey, Derek, I don't know what's going on, but the office asked about you." "About what?" "Whether you've ever challenged a supervisor or refused an order." Derek's fingers paused on the cart handle. "And you said, Ma, what's the year winning?" "I said you follow rules. Always run our sermons one." Derek nodded. "Thanks." But inside, his chest tightened. Not in fear, in awareness. They weren't gathering dirt. They were drawing lines. Reception. Seeing who stood where. That night, he sat again at his table. The photos spread before him. The falcon watermark stared back. He ran a finger along the wingtip, felt a slight texture in the ink. Then he noticed something new. In the bottom corner of the last photo, nearly invisible under the light, a number. Horsworth Fort Dick Turn, the sun, a gate, a code, a level. Whatever it was, it meant one thing. This wasn't over. This was just opening the door. He hadn't thought about that house in years. But that night, with the falcon watermark glowing under his desk lamp, the edges of memory peeled back like old wallpaper. It was always cold there. Not just the air or the silence. The kind of quiet that came from no TV, no laughter, just the hum of neighbors living lives a door too far away. The porch had one crooked step. The mailbox hung on by a single rusted nail. Wind chimes made from bent spoons clinked when the wind blew through the broken window pane. "Derek, bring the pot in before it freezes." His mother's voice echoed down the hall, where the light bulbs flickered and the floor creaked even when you weren't moving. He remembered the kitchen sink stained from iron water, always dripping, the smell of Vicks and burnt rice, and the old thermostat with a torn magazine clipping taped above it. People will tell you what you can't do, but they don't know what you've survived. That quote stayed with him longer than the heat ever did. He was 12 when he started skipping lunch to save for light bills. 15 when he lied about his age to stock boxes in the back of a dollar store. 17 when he stood beside his mother in court, her eyes red, her coat too thin for December. That night, they lost the apartment. They slept in the car. And she said gently, as if promising something only pain could prove, "You'll grow up, and no one will ever know you started from nothing, unless you act like you still live there." He remembered the way her hand rested on his chest, not to calm him, but to remind him it still beats. "So don't act like you're poor," she whispered. "Act like you're permanent." The apartment changed. The city changed. But that one sentence never did. Act like you're permanent. It echoed when he stood in front of job interviews, heart pounding, hands calloused from night shifts. It echoed when he folded uniforms in silence, watching younger men with smoother hands get promoted faster because they talked better, walked louder, dressed richer. It echoed every time he found a mess and cleaned it without being told. Every time someone dropped their coffee and never looked back. Because that's what permanence meant. Not waiting for permission to do what was right, but doing it so often that right became reflex. He remembered one day 2 years ago when a child had dropped a stuffed animal in the terminal. Dozens of people walked past. The child cried silently, too scared to move. Derek had bent down, picked it up gently, and returned it. No, thank you. No, no, none. Chorito. Not even eye contact from the mother. Just silence. But in that moment, he had realized something. Permanence wasn't about being seen. It was about being certain in who you were, even when no one watched. That was the seed she'd left in him. Not just survival, but legacy, a quiet, relentless kind of dignity. One that didn't need applause. One that could never be taken. Rain glistened on the runway like oil on stone, reflecting the weight of clouds that had hung over Terminal D since dawn. Inside, the lights buzzed faintly, too bright, too white, like a stage waiting for its next act. Derek walked the corridor with steps that no longer questioned themselves. His boots landed with quiet certainty. He passed the spot near baggage claim, where months ago he'd been humiliated, kneeling in front of strangers to collect thrown money. Today, no one sneered. No one filmed him. The same people who once smirked now shifted aside without thinking, not out of fear, but recognition. In his chest pocket, the Falcon photo pressed against his heartbeat like a silent metronome. It was Tuesday, 2 o'clock. The hour that had once meant nothing now opened doors without knocking. Gate D12 blinked green before he touched it. The room inside was small, dim, no windows, no clocks, one table, 2 chairs, and in one of them the billionaire. He hadn't changed. Same charcoal suit, same stillness that made the air bend around him. Derek entered without pause. He didn't nod, didn't speak. Neither did the man. On the desk sat 2 folders. One labeled observed. The other acted. The billionaire tapped the second, as if saying, that one is you. Inside a contract. Typed. Sealed. Signed above a name Derek had only seen on internal memos. Head of Internal Systems Integrity Airport Division. Position confirmed. Start date now. Derek didn't reach for it. He didn't have to, because he understood. This was not an interview. This was confirmation. This was what happens when quiet men don't quit, when they choose to carry weight the world doesn't see, until one day, someone does. And now, for the first time, it wasn't Derek being watched. He was the one holding the gaze. Friday afternoon. Terminal D no longer felt like an airport. It felt like a waiting room for justice. The temperature hadn't changed, but the air carried a different weight. Like everyone knew something was coming, but no one dared say it aloud. Managers whispered near water coolers. Radios crackled with short, clipped phrases. Staff were directed to the operations hall for a mandatory procedural update, but even the interns knew that was a lie. Legal had arrived an hour earlier. The head of HR was seen pacing near the old conference wing. Doors were closing, but not quietly. And then Derek entered. Not in coveralls. Not from the side hallway. He walked through the front, the executive corridor wearing a new badge. Black with gold trim. 2 internal officers walked behind him. Silent, unblinking. The crowd shifted. Eyes turned. Whispers dropped. Supervisors stiffened. One pulled out a notepad like instinct, as if protocol could shield him from what was coming. Derek said nothing. He didn't need to. At the front of the room, he set a sealed black folder on the table and slid a USB drive into the presentation port. The screen behind him came to life. A brief flicker. Then footage. Time-stamped. Crystal clear. The voice on the audio was unmistakable barking orders. Falsifying entries. Shouting slurs at staff off camera. The figure pacing in the videos, the senior cargo division manager. The same man now standing in the back row, slowly lowering himself into a seat, his knuckles white, his tie askew. Derek didn't look at him, but the room did. And for the first time in that terminal's history, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like justice holding its breath. As the final clip ended, the silence was deafening. Not because no one had anything to say, but because everything had already been said. In HD, time-stamped, undeniable. The man in the video, the senior logistics manager, sat hunched in his chair like a building mid-collapse. He tried to speak once, but it came out as a cough. No one offered him water. Derek finally turned. His voice was calm, not raised, not angry, just certain. "You taught me one thing," he said, eyes fixed on the man who once threw him under a freight pallet and called it protocol. "That people like me don't belong in rooms like this." He held up the folder again. "But people like you don't deserve to run them." Murmurs stirred. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were shifting, leaning forward, some nodding, some arms folded, brows furrowed. A few phones were up now, recording. The manager stood abruptly. "This is out of line. He's not authorized to." "He is," a voice interrupted from the back. The billionaire." He stepped into view like a shadow returning to claim its space. No entourage, no smugness, just stillness that made people listen. "I authorized every second of this," he said. He looked at Derek. "Because I needed to see who you were when no one was watching." Then turned back to the manager. "And I needed to see what you'd do when you thought no one ever would." Security approached. The manager flinched. For the first time, he was the one being escorted out. Not to a promotion, to an inquiry. And the man who once mocked Derek for carrying luggage too carefully was now the one who couldn't carry the weight of his own actions. The room held its breath as Derek opened the second folder. No one moved. No one blinked. Inside was a new badge, not paper, not plastic. Brass-edged navy cord, and heavier than it looked. It read Integrity Director, Field Oversight, Eastern Region. Issued by the Internal Systems Ethics Command. Not a promotion. Not a transfer. A takeover. Derek looked up, letting the weight of that title settle into the air. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Effective today," he said. "This division is under review." The silence didn't break, it snapped. A few employees gasped. One of the supervisors let out a breath like he'd been punched. Someone whispered, "He's in charge." Derek didn't acknowledge it. He turned instead to the intern standing near the wall, the same kid who had once asked him how to load a cargo strap properly. "You'll run the audit checklist with me." The intern's eyes widened. Derek handed him a pen, no ceremony, no speech. Just a quiet transfer of trust. "That's how legacy starts," he said. "Someone gives you one step." He then turned back to the screen. One press, and the presentation ended. Lights brightened. Conversation returned in half-formed sentences. But the structure beneath the floor, that had already changed. Because the man they once ignored, the man who used to sweep corners no one saw, now held the authority to dismantle systems everyone obeyed. Not with revenge, with purpose. And in that moment, under the same flickering lights that once made him invisible, Derek wasn't a survivor. He was now the standard. The senior manager didn't protest. He didn't shout or defend himself. He simply sat there, shrinking into the chair as if hoping the floor would swallow him. When the officer asked for his badge, he handed it over with hands that once slammed clipboards onto tables now trembling, unsure of their place. A few phones in the room were raised, not out of disrespect, but as quiet witnesses. Live stream comments rolled in while Derek for director, for Nustranan. "This is justice." The man stood slowly, every movement stripped of the arrogance he once carried. He tried to look at Derek, maybe to plead, maybe to find some shred of the past where he still had control, but Derek didn't give him that. He had nothing to offer a man who had spent years taking. The billionaire stepped forward again, not with a speech, but with a nod to security. It wasn't exile. It was justice being executed the way it rarely is: quiet, complete, and in public. As the door closed behind him, someone clapped. Not loud, not dramatic, Just one sharp sound, then another, and then more until the entire room, once filled with fear and silence, echoed with hands clapping not for revenge, but for release. Derek remained still, absorbing none of it. He didn't raise his arms, didn't bow. He simply walked back to the console, loaded a second file, and began outlining new policies, staff reforms, a reporting hotline, a rewritten structure where integrity wasn't optional. He wasn't cleaning house. He was building one. From the foundation up. By Monday morning, the old office was stripped bare. The senior manager's nameplate was gone, his inbox deleted, his coffee mug still sitting in the bin where he'd tossed it during his last tantrum. No one touched it. They didn't need to. The stain he left behind was being cleaned from the inside out. Derek didn't take over the corner office, he had it sealed for forensic audit. That was the difference. He wasn't replacing power with power. He was restoring trust. In the break room, the posters had changed. No longer the generic HR slogans no one read. These were real integrity as a position, silence as a choice in report. A reform. Reste reorductumum. The first one had his signature at the bottom, not as a message, but as a standard. Around the terminal, the shifts were subtle but unmistakable. Conversations between departments got shorter and more honest. People clocked in earlier, not out of fear, but clarity. The quiet ones, the overnight loaders, the part-time maintenance crew, they started getting asked for their opinions. Their answers showed up in memos. Someone finally fixed the leaking pipe above the locker hallway. Someone else replaced the broken hand dryer in the men's room. These weren't miracles. They were just decisions that used to be postponed because no one wanted to listen to the lower levels. Now, the lower levels had direct channels, and they were using them. When Derek walked the halls, he didn't get salutes or awkward silence. He got nods, pensionerns, eye contact. A few firm shoulders squared just a bit more when he passed, because something larger than policy had shifted. Culture, and it started in the space between his silence and their choice to finally speak. Late one evening, long after the final plane had lifted into the night sky, Derek stood alone beneath the fluorescent hum of Carousel 4, the same carousel where, months ago, he had once been berated for being too careful with a diplomat's luggage. That moment had played in his head 100 times. Tonight, it was quiet. The tiles beneath him had been scrubbed that morning. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Somewhere down the concourse, a janitor whistled. Derek looked up at the overhead monitor. No flights. Just a message blinking thank you. Ground ops team. He exhaled. Behind him, footsteps echoed. It was the young intern, now holding a clipboard, the one Derek had once asked to double-check a cargo strap. The freight route checks out, the intern said. No anomalies. Not even small ones. Derek smiled, just slightly. That's how you know it's working. The intern hesitated. You gonna apply for regional director? They say the board's watching. Derek shook his head. I'm already where I need to be. He walked past the carousel, not in a hurry, just steady the same way he used to move heavy boxes. No one noticed. Only now, every step reshaped the floor beneath him. He stopped near the staff terminal and entered his badge into the system. The access changed. New panels appeared. His name was listed as Oversight Supervisor, Ethics Anchor. That last part wasn't from a manual. It was something the system defaulted to when someone refused to list a job title. Derek hadn't filled in his. The system guessed based on behavior. He chuckled softly. Ethics Anchor. Not bad. And as he walked out of Terminal D into the quiet night, he didn't look back. Because when a building finally stands on solid foundation, the architect doesn't stay to watch the bricks dry. He moves on and builds another. Weeks passed, then months. Accusations. Terminal D changed not in its architecture, but in its posture. New posters lined the halls. Not corporate fluff. Real faces, baggage handlers, janitors, dispatchers with quotes handwritten beneath spoke up. Got heard. Took a risk. Got backed. Above the security checkpoint, a new mural was painted. It wasn't signed. Just a pair of black work boots placed neatly beside a golden badge. The caption read, Integrity walks quietly. In the cafeteria, a new table had been installed in the corner, the open chair. Anyone could sit. Any topic could be raised. No rank required. The first time Derek sat there, no one dared join him. The second time, someone did. The third time it was full. A group of trainees came in from another region. They were told quietly, Terminal D's different. They do things real here. The old cynicism was fading. People used to whisper when supervisors passed. Now they nodded or offered feedback. And supervisors actually responded. Performance reviews stopped focusing on speed alone. A new metric appeared, systemic respect compliance. It confused people at first. But then they saw what it rewarded: decency, responsibility, integrity under pressure. One morning, a cleaner opened her locker to find a note taped inside. Thanks for how you handled Gate 12 last week. That mattered. It wasn't signed. But it didn't need to be. Because kindness that moves the system doesn't ask for credit. It just sets the standard. It was almost closing hour when the young intern, now months into his role, found himself alone at the open chair table, sorting through audit forms. He paused, looked around. No supervisors watching. No crowd. Just quiet. He took out a pen and wrote something on the corner of one of the forms. Not a complaint. Not a report. Just a note. She handled Gate 12 like a pro. Quiet, fast, respectful. He folded the form, slipped it into the tray, and smiled. Across the room, Derek stood by the coffee machine, refilling the decaf tank. He didn't look over, but he saw. Later that night, the cleaner from Gate 12 found a printed badge on her locker hook, nothing fancy. Just her name, and underneath, consistently trusted. No signature. Just a small CLO. Ethics. Somewhere, on a different terminal, a team lead opened a training manual Derek had restructured. Page 1 now read, integrity isn't a value. It's an action repeated until it defines you. People didn't quote Derek. They didn't need to. They quoted each other. They copied the way meetings opened, the way shifts were handed over, the way mistakes were admitted without fear. No one called it a revolution, but everyone knew it was one. And as one flight lifted into the clouds that evening, someone looked out the window, down at the terminal below, and smiled, not knowing why. But somewhere deep down, they felt it. Something was finally right with the ground. The last scene wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Somewhere in the quiet corridor of Terminal D, the janitor passed by the open chair table and found a folded note sitting alone on the wood. No name. No handwriting she recognized. Just 3 words. What you noticed, next to it was a small pin-round, simple brushed steel, the kind used in old uniforms. Engraved on it, barely legible unless held to the light respect given, not earned. She didn't pick it up. She just stood there, breathing, letting it mean whatever it needed to mean. Because sometimes the loudest redemption isn't applause. It's someone remembering what no one else did and choosing to carry that forward. Have you ever been in Derek's shoes, invisible, underestimated, waiting for someone to see your worth? Or maybe in someone else's shoes now, with a chance to make things right. This isn't just a story. It's a mirror. Stay until the end. The twist will redefine what redemption truly means. If you witnessed injustice like this, what would you do? Comment below. And subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, where silent redemption becomes legacy and quiet choices change the world.